Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
In July of 1967, something very surprising happened in Montreal. The French president, Charles de Gaulle, stood on a balcony at City Hall. He shouted four words that made history in Canada. Vive le Québec libre. This means long live free Quebec. These words caused a huge problem for the country. The Canadian Prime Minister at the time, Lester Pearson, quickly said that these remarks were unacceptable. President de Gaulle was forced to leave Canada much earlier than planned. This moment showed something deep about Canada, a country that its own leaders had not fully understood for a century. It showed Canada was always searching for what it truly was and what it should become. This surprising speech took place during Expo 67. Expo 67 was a grand World's Fair held in Montreal. It was the main event of Canada's 100th birthday celebrations. For 6 months, millions of visitors from around the world came to see the amazing buildings and new ideas. Canada wanted to use this time to show itself as a grown-up, confident nation to the world. But instead, a foreign president clearly showed the country's main division, more clearly than any Canadian had dared. This is the central idea of the Canadian story. For over 150 years since its creation, Canada has remained an unfinished nation. It is a country always searching for its identity. It is often known more for what it is not like the United States, not fully British, not fully French, and not always a peaceable kingdom. The journey to find Canadian identity has not been one of great national unity. Instead, it has been marked by many problems, compromises, and important talks that are still ongoing. What makes Canada hard to understand is exactly this feeling of being incomplete. Other nations can point to clear founding stories, created by revolutions, wars, or big ideas. Canada's story is different. It started with meetings in rooms, changes to laws, and careful work to manage many different groups with different complaints. The country was born not from the fire of revolution, but from practical needs and agreements. This is key to understanding Canada. It has always been an experiment in managing many cultures, vast distances, and different ideas. 2. The first people. Many thousands of years ago, long before people from Europe arrived, the land that is now called Canada was already home to many different groups of people. These were the indigenous nations. There were hundreds of these nations, each with their own languages, unique ways of living, and deep connections to the land. For example, the Haudenosaunee lived in the east, and the Plains Cree lived in the middle of the country. They had complex societies and rich cultures that had existed for a very long time. Then, people from Europe started to come. In the year 1600, a French explorer named Samuel de Champlain built a settlement in a place called Quebec. This was the start of French settlement. Later, British settlers also came to these lands. These new arrivals wanted land and resources. This led to many challenges and much sadness for the indigenous peoples. The European settlers slowly took control of indigenous lands. They tried to change indigenous cultures. A very dark part of this history is the residential schools. These schools began in the 1880s and continued until the 1990s. The government and churches made indigenous children go to these schools. Children were taken from their homes and families by force. The idea was to make them forget their own languages, beliefs, and traditions. People even said the goal was to kill the Indian in the child. Life in these schools was often very bad. Many children suffered terrible abuse. Thousands of children died from sickness and neglect in the schools. They were buried in unmarked graves. These schools caused great harm to indigenous children, families, and entire communities. The pain from this time is still felt today. This way that indigenous peoples were treated is a big, sad part of Canada's past. Some people call it Canada's original sin. It means a serious wrong that happened at the country's beginning. It allowed the new country to grow by taking from the first people. Understanding this past is very important for Canada today. It is a story of injustice that needs to be remembered and addressed for a better future. 3. Two big groups. After the first peoples lived across the land for thousands of years, new arrivals came from Europe. In 1608, a French explorer named Samuel de Champlain started a settlement in Quebec. This marked the beginning of New France. Over the next 150 years, a distinct French-speaking society grew and developed in North America. The people were mostly Catholic and built their lives around important activities like the fur trade. They created a unique culture that was neither fully like the one in Old France nor like the indigenous ways of life. This new society saw itself as truly belonging to the New World, with deep roots in the land. But things changed dramatically. In 1759, a big war took place between Britain and France. Britain won this war, which meant they gained control of New France. This was a critical moment for the future of Canada. Historically, after winning a war, a conquering power might try to force the defeated people to adopt their language and customs. However, the British leaders made a different and unusual choice. They decided not to remove or fully change the French-speaking population. In 1774, the British government passed a very important law called the Quebec Act. This act officially allowed French civil law to continue in the region. It also protected the rights of the Catholic Church and guaranteed the use of the French language. This decision was a clever move by the British, helping them keep peace and gain some loyalty from the French-speaking inhabitants in their newly expanded territory. More importantly, it ensured that a distinct French-Canadian culture and society could survive and flourish under British rule. This act created a fundamental duality that has been a part of Canada ever since. There were now two main groups living side by side: English-speaking and French-speaking. These groups often had different legal systems, different dominant languages, and even different ideas about religion and the role of the government. This was not like other places that tried to blend all cultures into one melting pot. Instead, Canadian society was formed with two distinct parallel parts. Many people began to call this situation the two solitudes. It meant that English and French Canada, while sharing the same land, often lived separate cultural lives. This established a lasting pattern for how Canada would develop as a country. It showed that different cultures could exist together within one nation. But it also started a long and often difficult conversation about what Canada truly was and how these two major groups would share power and identity. This basic division led to many ongoing challenges and important discussions in the centuries that followed. 4. A new country. In the 1860s, British colonies in North America faced many problems. Governments in Ontario and Quebec often disagreed. People also feared the powerful United States, which had just fought a big civil war. Irish-American groups sometimes attacked Canadian areas. Britain also wanted the colonies to pay for their own defense. These issues led colonial leaders to meet and plan to join together. Key figures like John A. Macdonald and George Etienne Cartier led these talks. They were practical. They focused on defense, money, and economy. Their goal was a stable new country, not a revolution. In 1867, the British North America Act created the Dominion of Canada. 4 provinces joined: Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. Canada gained a federal system, sharing power between the central and provincial governments. It had a British-style government, with the British monarch as head. Canada got much self-rule, though it was not fully independent. This was different from the United States, born from revolution and war. Canada's birth came from meetings and talks about railways and trade. It was about practical deals, not grand new ideas. Leaders aimed for order and good management. The new country soon looked west. In 1869, Canada bought Rupert's Land. This land was home to the Métis people, who had mixed Indigenous and European roots and a unique culture. Canada bought the land without asking the Métis. Louis Riel became a Métis leader, fighting for their rights. This was the Red River Rebellion. The Métis formed their own government and negotiated with Ottawa. Riel's efforts helped create Manitoba as a province, guaranteeing French and English languages and Métis land rights. But this success was short. Many Métis lost their land, and Riel was exiled. He returned in 1885 to lead another fight in Saskatchewan. Canadian soldiers ended it. Riel was caught and executed. Riel's execution caused great division. English-speaking Canadians saw him as a rebel. French-speaking Canadians saw him as a hero for minority rights. This showed deep disagreements between Canada's two main groups, making it harder for them to get along for years. Canada began with practical decisions, but its expansion also brought deep divisions. Two big wars. When the First World War began in August 1914, Canada was part of the British Empire. This meant that Canada automatically joined the war when Britain did. Many English-speaking Canadians were very excited to join. They felt loyal to Britain and wanted to help. Soldiers went to Europe, but the war was much harder than they expected. Canadian troops fought in big, tough battles like Ypres, Somme, and Passchendaele. They suffered many losses. But over time, the Canadian Army learned a lot and became very strong and skilled. A very important moment for Canada was the Battle of Vimy Ridge in April 1917. Here, all 4 divisions of Canadian soldiers fought together for the first time. They were led by Canadian officers, not British ones. Other armies had tried and failed to win this battle before. Canadian soldiers planned carefully and used new ways to fight. They won, but many Canadian lives were lost, over 10,600. This victory showed that Canadian soldiers were very capable and brave. Many people felt that Vimy Ridge was when Canada truly became a nation, showing its own strength and identity on the world stage. However, the war also caused big problems at home. As more soldiers were needed and casualties grew, the government wanted to force men to join the army. This was called conscription. English and French Canadians disagreed strongly about this. English Canadians thought it was important to fight for Britain and freedom. French Canadians, especially in Quebec, felt it was not their war and they had no strong link to Europe's conflicts. This argument caused riots in Quebec, and some people even died, showing deep divisions within the country. Later, during the Second World War in 1939, Canada had more independence. Prime Minister Mackenzie King made sure the Canadian Parliament agreed to join the war, not just automatically follow Britain. Canadian soldiers again fought bravely. They helped in important events like the Battle of Britain, the Italian campaign, and the D-Day landings in Normandy. But the question of conscription came up again. The Prime Minister had promised French Canadians that men would not be forced to fight overseas. However, because many soldiers were needed and casualties mounted, he broke this promise in 1944. This second conscription crisis was not as violent as the first, but it still showed that the country had fundamental differences. These two big wars helped Canada become known around the world as a strong, independent country. Yet, inside Canada, they also highlighted how difficult it was for everyone to agree on what it truly meant to be Canadian. 6. A time of change. The 1960s brought many new ideas and big changes to Canada. One of the biggest changes happened in Quebec. This period is known as the Quiet Revolution. Before this, Quebec society was very traditional. The Catholic Church had a lot of power in schools and hospitals. The government of Quebec was also more old-fashioned, focusing on the past. In 1960, a new government came to power in Quebec. It wanted to make Quebec more modern and take charge of its own affairs. The government took control of schools from the church. It also took over companies that provided electricity, making them public. Many new social programs were started to help people in Quebec. As a result, Quebec society became very different, very fast. Fewer people went to church, and more women joined the workforce and went to universities. It was a rapid shift from old ways to new, progressive ideas. With these changes, a new feeling of Quebec nationalism grew stronger. People in Quebec started to feel they were a distinct nation, with a unique place in North America. They used a new slogan, Maître chez nous, which means masters in our own house. This was not just about keeping their French culture alive. It was about Quebec having more political power and control over its own future within Canada. This new identity challenged the very structure of the Canadian Federation. This new nationalism also led to some difficult and violent times. Some groups wanted Quebec to be a separate country, not just more powerful within Canada. A group called the Front de Libération du Québec, or FLQ, used bombings and kidnappings to achieve this goal of Quebec independence. In 1970, this led to a very serious event called the October Crisis. The FLQ kidnapped a British diplomat and a Quebec government minister. The minister was later killed, causing great alarm across the country. The Canadian government sent soldiers to Quebec to keep order, showing how serious the desire for separation had become. After this crisis, the idea of Quebec becoming its own country grew even more popular for some. A political party called the Parti Québécois was formed by René Lévesque in 1968. This party openly wanted Quebec to become independent from Canada. Their main idea was called sovereignty association. This meant Quebec would be a country on its own, with its own government, but still have strong economic ties with Canada. This movement created a deep division and challenged Canada's unity, raising big questions about its future. This new nationalism also led to some difficult and violent times. Some groups wanted Quebec to be a separate country, not just more powerful within Canada. A group called the Front de Libération du Québec, or FLQ, used bombings and kidnappings to achieve this goal of Quebec independence. In 1970, this led to a very serious event called the October Crisis. The FLQ kidnapped a British diplomat and a Quebec government minister. The minister was later killed, causing great alarm across the country. The Canadian government sent soldiers to Quebec to keep order, showing how serious the desire for separation had become. After this crisis, the idea of Quebec becoming its own country grew even more popular for some. A political party called the Parti Québécois was formed by René Lévesque in 1968. This party openly wanted Quebec to become independent from Canada. Their main idea was called sovereignty association. This meant Quebec would be a country on its own, with its own government, but still have strong economic ties with Canada. This movement created a deep division and challenged Canada's unity, raising big questions about its future as a country. A new Canada. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, as Prime Minister, had new ideas for Canada. He wanted to make Canada a modern and fair country for everyone. In 1969, his government made French and English the two official languages of Canada. This policy was called official bilingualism. It meant that French-speaking Canadians should feel welcome and served in their language across the country. This aimed to strengthen national unity by respecting both languages. Then, in 1971, Canada became the first country in the world to adopt official multiculturalism. This policy recognized that Canada was home to many different cultures, not just English and French. It celebrated the heritage of all immigrant groups, like Ukrainian, Italian, and Chinese Canadians. Trudeau believed this would make Canada a strong country where many communities could live together, with shared rights and no single dominant culture. A big change for Canada came in 1982. The country finally gained full control over its own constitution from Britain. This new constitution included the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Charter became a very important document. It protected the rights of all Canadians, such as freedom of speech and religion. It also included a section that recognized Canada's multicultural heritage. The Charter helped define what it meant to be a Canadian citizen, focusing on rights and equality for individuals. However, the 1982 Constitution was controversial in Quebec. The Quebec government did not sign it, which caused problems for Canadian unity. Over the next years, there were big political fights to try and bring Quebec into agreement. One attempt was the Meech Lake Accord in 1987. It aimed to recognize Quebec as a distinct society within Canada. But many people across Canada did not agree with this accord, and it failed in 1990. Another plan, the Charlottetown Accord in 1992, also failed when Canadians voted against it. The question of Quebec's separation became very serious. In 1995, Quebec held a referendum. People in Quebec voted on whether their province should become an independent country. The result was extremely close. Only a small number of votes kept Canada united. 50.6% voted no to separation, and 49.4% voted yes. This close vote showed how fragile Canada's unity was, and how much work was still needed to keep the country together. It made everyone think deeply about Canada's identity and future. 8. The Way Forward. Canada's story has always been about searching for what it means to be a nation. From the start, Canada has been seen as an unfinished nation. This idea means the country is always changing and growing, never fully decided on its identity. Maybe this is not a weakness, but a special strength. Canada is good at managing many different people, long distances, and different ideas. A big challenge for Canada today is truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Chapters before talked about the sad history of residential schools and how Indigenous peoples lost their land and culture. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission made 94 calls to action. These are steps to make things right. They ask Canada to build new, fair relationships with Indigenous communities. But this work is slow, and there is still much to do. Canada's identity is not a final answer. Instead, it is a talk that never ends. Canadians keep discussing what their country should be. Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau once said, "Canada has no single main identity." This can be true because Canada is a place where different people work to live together, not always in full agreement, but with respect. This ongoing conversation, even with problems and disagreements, helps Canada stay united. It shows that many different people can live and grow together. Canada chooses to keep looking for its identity rather than finding one final answer. This way of thinking, where uncertainty can be a kind of wisdom, may be Canada's gift to the world. What do you think is the most important part of being Canadian today?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.